The cave opened out into an enormous circular amphitheater, as large as the Black Lake, only empty of water. High up on the far side of the cavern wall sat several small, single-story structures. They were of the same construction as the city just behind them, perhaps some kind of gateway buildings. Only these were not nearly as rundown as the structures in the main part of the city. Someone had kept them reasonably intact. The ground around them had been cleared of debris, and walls and roofs were neatly, if crudely, patched. They gave every sign of being occupied. Below, they saw the native the princess had nicked with the axe holding his shoulder as he ran toward a great crowd of furred beings clustered in the cavern's center. They stood around a modest pond, a depression kept full by seepage from the ceiling. A real bonfire blazed to the pond's left, fed by assorted yellow-brown substances which were not honest wood but which burned very efficiently. Framed by pond and fire were 3 large stalagmites, to which were tied 2 growling Yuzum and an old woman. Hala stood bound by several vine-like cords, while Hin and Ki were nearly mummified by many more. 3PO and R2-D2 stood enveloped in vine cords nearby. At least 200 Cowway, including armed females and children, clustered around pond, fire and prisoners. The wounded relative running toward them was now yelling at the top of his lungs. Luke started to turn. The princess grabbed his arm, stared hard at him. "Where would we run to, Luke? They'll be after us in seconds, and they know these passages. If we have to fight and die, I'd rather do it out in the open, and not on the lake." She hefted the fallen axe. Leia, but she was already scrambling down the rubble toward the cavern. By this time the injured Cowway had reached the crowd and was jabbering excitedly to several large males who wore unmistakable headdresses of stone, bone, and other materials. Several cries came from backward-looking members of the assembly. All eyes shifted to the 2 beings walking slowly toward them. Luke held his lightsaber before him. The native Leia had wounded now pointed to the glowing weapon and muttered nervously. As they neared the mob of assembled troglodytes, Luke made what he hoped was a positive, confident gesture with the saber. The crowd, muttering uncertainly, parted. Twitching internally, Luke and the princess marched between the ranks of intent natives toward the 3 captives. While they respected the power of the lightsaber, Luke had the distinct impression they were anything but panicked by it. "They're not sure what to do," the princess murmured, confirming his own thoughts. "They seem to admire your saber, but they're not going to grant you godhood. They'll admire it more if they try and stop us," Luke said grimly, with increasing confidence. He gestured sharply at one knot of Cowways which were pressing a little close. "Luke!" Hala yelped as the 2 drew near the captives. Both Yuzum were chattering gleefully at Luke and to one another. "Well, you met us," he observed sardonically as he studied their bonds. "You were right about that too, Hala." "Not quite the way I intended, boy." She shouted something to the 3 splendidly attired natives the wounded one had approached, then resumed whispering to Luke, "You realize we haven't much chance of getting out of here." "She's right, sir," said 3PO. "Try to save yourselves. I didn't walk and row this far to end up sacrificed to some subterranean deity," he shot back. Abruptly, he realized what had just happened. "You can talk to them," he stated in surprise. "A little. Their language is a variant of the one the Greenies use. It's not easy, sort of like talking underwater. But I can make the chiefs understand me." "Chiefs?" "It seems Cowway tribes are ruled by a triumvirate," she explained. "Those 3 laughing boys in the bonnets over there. I just made them a proposal. If they're as noble, or sporting, as I think they are, we might have one chance." "Proposal? What proposal?" the princess inquired suspiciously. "I'll get to that shortly," Hala told her evasively. "We'd located the way down and were on our way to meet you when we were ambushed. It was in a narrow passageway, and in close quarters there were just too many of them. They used nets on your Yuzum and droid friends, boy. We didn't have a chance. We might if I set you free now," Luke theorized. Where are your weapons? Take it easy, Luke, she admonished him. She jerked her head in the direction of the cluster of low-lying buildings, far off on the right side of the cavern. You'd never make it over there. Besides, I didn't see which house they put them in. Even if I knew exactly, you'd never be able to cut us free, get to them, and get back in time. You're pretty good with that lightsaber, I expect, but you can't fight 100 spears all flying at you from different directions at once. Unless, she brightened hopefully, that toy of yours generates a screen as well as a blade. No, Luke confessed, just the blade. How long have you been tied here? About half a day, and my bladder's killing me, she informed him. They've spent the time arguing about which way to go about killing us. They don't have any personal grudge against us, they just don't like humans generally. Not surprising, if they've been able to observe how the miners treat the greenies. I don't think our cowboy friends would be too upset if every human on Mimban suddenly picked up and left. Tell them we're not like the local humans, Luke insisted, eyeing the circle of hostile faces. Tell them that we don't want anything to do with the local people either. This isn't a tribe of philosophers, Luke boy, Hala explained patiently. Their concept of government is damned simple. You can't explain something like the rebellion to the cowboy. But I think, she added, peering past Luke at the three chiefs who were still engaged in heated discussion among themselves, they'll give us one chance. I don't believe it, the princess countered, glowering at the old woman. Would we give an enemy who'd already killed 4 of our own a second chance? According to the fellow with the gash in his shoulder who preceded you here, Hala went on, you only killed 2. The others are just wounded. Apparently the cowboy treat death as an inevitable, everyday occurrence. Primitive society, remember. To their way of thinking the 2 you killed simply died a little earlier than they should have. One chief even berated the dead men just now for making a poor decision. Says they ought to have waited for reinforcements. He's arguing that the blame isn't yours, it's the dead ones, for acting stupid when they should have known better. That's barbaric, the princess muttered. Hala looked smug. What have I been telling you all along? Anyway, the one with the shoulder you sliced, Luke, is telling. Not him, objected the princess, me. Oh? Hala's estimate of the princess rose a notch. Well, he's been ranting on about what a great fighter Luke is. Luke looked distressed at this admiration of an action he despised. A lightsaber against spears and axes isn't a very fair fight. Hala nodded agreeably. That's what they're arguing about now. I'm not sure I follow you, Hala. I tried to tell them everything, Luke boy, she explained, when you and the girl were climbing down this side of the rockfall. I tried to convince them that not only were we from off-planet and of different variety from the miners, but that you were both fighting the humans on the surface and that if we won, you'd kick them all off Mimban. Then the cowboy could go back to roaming the surface whenever they pleased. One chief is all for it, the second thinks I'm the biggest liar in the history of their race, and the third is undecided. That's what all the noise is about, the first 2 are each trying to persuade the third to take his side. What about this proposal? The princess wanted to know. Oh, that. Hala managed to look embarrassed. I suggested that if they couldn't make up their minds as to what the truth was, they could let Kanu decide. As near as I can figure, Kanu's their local god in charge of adjudicating. All our greatest warrior has to do to convince Kanu that we're telling the truth is to defeat one of their tribal champions. Luke blinked. Give me that again, Hala. Don't worry, Hala assured him, you have the Force on your side, remember? Force? I'd rather have my saber. She shook her head apologetically. Sorry, Luke boy. You said it yourself. Axes and spears against a saber's not fair. Luke turned away, looked discouraged. I'm no fighter, Hala, and you overestimate the Force's usefulness. Luke, these people are no giants. They're not midgets, either. What happens if we agree to this contest and I happen to lose? Hala's answer was delivered with her usual aplomb. Then we'll likely have our throats cut in some uniquely primitive manner. He kicked angrily at the ground. Please, Luke. I tried my best. It's our only possibility. They wouldn't agree to fight one of the Yuzum. They don't think of them as intelligent. Either that, or they're not as primitive as you think, declared the princess. It's not that so much, child, as the fact that it's we humans who are exploiting the surface. So we're the ones who have to prove ourselves before Kanu. Further discussion was forestalled when the three chiefs abruptly broke off their conversation. One of them, Luke couldn't tell them apart, turned and called something out at Hala. She listened intently, then grinned. It's on. They are willing to abide by Kanu's judgment. She turned a concerned gaze to Luke. I'm an old woman, boy, but like I've told you, I still have a lot of living planned. Don't let me down. You must win, Luke, the princess said. If I don't attend that meeting of the underground on Sarkarpas eventually, our absence is likely to keep them from ever considering joining the alliance. Luke's eyes moved from Hala to Leia. The alliance? What about me? Don't let you down. Both of you listen. He tapped his chest and regarded Leia. It's more important in the end that I go on living than it is for me to make some vague patriotic sacrifice. Or, he continued, facing Hala, that I get you out of a jam that you should have been able to avoid. You're the one with all the Mimbanian experience. Luke boy, she started to argue. He shut her up with a wave. Not now. It doesn't matter anymore. He handed the lightsaber to the princess. All right, what are the rules? And who do I fight? Let's finish this, one way or the other. You fight, Hala translated laboriously, listening to the chief's words, until one of you quits, or dies. The word for quit is seen. That doesn't matter, since you've nothing to gain by saying it. Luke merely grunted, walked toward the chiefs. The entire crowd was babbling now, apparently in anticipation of the imminent battle. Luke found that despite the coolness he was beginning to sweat. The crowd parted and Luke had his first glimpse of the cowway he apparently was going to fight. Some of the tenseness left him. Though broader than he was, the creature was the same height. He didn't appear especially ferocious, either. There were larger cowways in the crowd and more fearsome-looking ones. Yet this modest-appearing specimen was the chosen champion. There had to be a reason, which he was sure to discover sooner than he wished. He examined his opponent guardedly. For its part, the cowway stared back, gave him a profound bow and made an intricate movement with both arms. Unable to duplicate the complex ritual, Luke gave the alliance salute. What sounded like a murmur of approval issued from the crowd. It might also have been their way of saying that he was going to be torn to small furless bits, but he preferred to believe the other. The cowway walked past him, stopped on the far side of the pond. What do I do now? Luke wondered, calling back to Hala. Walk to this side of the pond and face him, he was told. When the second chief, that one in the middle with the blue spine sticking out of his collar, drops his right arm. The two of you go after each other. Her voice held no humor now. Do we have to fight in the water? He inquired worriedly. No one said so. That's good enough for me. A singularly chilling howl came from the crowd. It was followed by dead silence. The middle chief raised its arm, dropped it with a swipe. Immediately, the cowway started across the pond toward Luke. Luke prowled his side of the water, trying to decide what to try. Should he strike at the head or body? It was impossible to detect any obvious vulnerable spot under that grey carpet of fur. Shouts from the onlookers thundered around the cavern walls. Why did you bother to tell Luke the word for quitting? The princess whispered to Hala, if he can't gain anything by using it. I'm hoping he'll get in a tight spot and use it as a last resort, Hala whispered back. But why? Because it's not the cowway term for quitting. It's a local swear word. Has something to do with parentage, I think. Whirling, the princess gave her a shocked look. In Alliance's cause, why'd you do that, old woman? I thought it might do us some good if Luke yells something defiant while that brute is choking the life out of him. We've nothing to lose by it. Luke doesn't either. The cowway admire spirit. The princess was too shocked and disgusted to reply. Her obvious feelings had no effect on Hala. She was staring past her, toward the pond. If we're lucky he'll never have to utter it, she said blithely. In any case, there's nothing we can do about it now. Luke jumped around the edge of the water, trying to get some estimate of his rival's mobility. Either his opponent was too clever to respond, or more likely he just didn't care. The cowway headed relentlessly straight for Luke, splashing and kicking up water in a fine display of indifference to anything Luke chose to do. As far as Luke was concerned, the cowway was far too enthusiastic about this contest. Its actions bespoke an assurance Luke couldn't begin to share. If he remained where he was, Luke reflected frantically, the cowway would have to come upslope out of the water after him. T would give the worried youth a slight technical advantage. So he stopped moving around, checked his footing, and waited. Arms outstretched for an unaffectionate embrace, the cowway charged. Luke met directness with directness. As soon as the creature was close, he threw his best punch straight at the onrushing jaw. Maybe the cowway had glass chins. As it turned out, the metaphor was inappropriate. The cowway's lower jaw was made of solid granite, not glass. Even so, the force of Luke's blow stopped it. For a second. When it came on him again, Luke jabbed with his other fist at where the solar plexus would have been in a human. It didn't even slow the cowway. Luke tried to duck and roll under an outstretched arm, but the aborigine was startlingly quick. It grabbed Luke's shoulder and spun him around. Luke desperately tried to backpedal, found himself in water. The pond bottom was slippery and he fell backward, landing with a splash. As the cowway threw himself at him, he twisted in fear and found himself on top of his opponent. With both hands he tried to force the furry head beneath the water. It wouldn't budge. It was rapidly growing clear to Luke why the cowway had selected this slightly smaller version of themselves as their representative to Kanu's court. He was lithe and agile and one big piece of muscle under all the deceptively soft-looking fuzz. No other rules, he reminded himself. With one hand he hunted hopefully along the slick pond bottom for a rock, for anything solid and smaller than his fist. He encountered only sand, and all the probing unbalanced him. The cowway threw him off and fell on his chest. Unlike the native, Luke found his head easily forced under the surface. A few centimeters of water served to turn the roars of the crowd to a muffled echo. He stared upward. Distorted by the water, the batrachian face of the cowway glared down at him. Inexorable pressure held him under with one hand as the native balanced itself with the other. Desperately, Luke turned to the right. His mouth bumped against something warm and he bit down hard. With a jerk, the cowway pulled its injured member away. Luke's head broke water and he swallowed it gratefully. Like another opponent, the crowd noise assailed him again. Through it he could hear Hala and Leia and 3PO screaming frantic encouragement. Both Yuzum were hooting deafeningly, while R2 beeped and whistled loud enough to drown out half the cowways. If only Hin were in his place. The cowway above him wouldn't be grinning so easily. As the hand he'd bitten returned and tried to get a fresh grip on his skull, Luke twisted violently and probed with both hands. Fingers searched the creature's flanks, hunting for anything sensitive. Most of the regions Luke wanted to try were out of reach, however. Impatient, the cowway brought its other hand over to steady Luke's head so that the right hand could get a firm grip on it. Thus balanced, Luke discovered the water working to his advantage. He heaved and spun. The teetering native went over sideways into the pond. Thoroughly soaked and half drowned, Luke staggered to his feet. He eyed the cowway as it rose again, tried to think of something to attack next. Meanwhile, the native lowered its shoulders and charged. This time Luke used his right leg. As the youth put every ounce of his remaining strength into the kick, his foot fairly exploded out of the water. It caught the cowway in the midsection, roughly where a human stomach would be located. Whether from the tremendous force of the kick or the fact that he'd struck a more vulnerable area, the cowway let out a startled woof and sat down hard in the water. Stumbling toward it, Luke lifted his leg and kicked again. The cowway wasn't so stunned it failed to raise an arm to block the kick. Simultaneously it grabbed the swinging leg and fell across it. Luke tried to turn over as the still-sitting cowway pulled him toward itself by the one thrashing leg. If the creature could get its hands on him this time, Luke knew the matter would be ended. He was face down on the sand. There would be nothing he could do. His dragging hands encountered something oblong and unyielding. A rock, but too large for him to get a hand around. He'd need both hands to raise anything so massive, and much better leverage than he possessed at the moment to make use of it. The hand he feared came down on the back of his neck. It shoved downward, brutally hard, so hard that Luke's face plunged into the sandy bottom of the pond. He felt the clean grains pressing into his nostrils. Raised on a desert world, he was about to meet a death damper than any he'd ever conceived of. His thoughts became hazy as his blood scoured the last dregs of oxygen from his lungs. A voice sang fancifully in the back of his mind. It was exhorting him to relax. Well, that was simple enough to do, he reflected pleasantly. Relax he would. He was tired, so tired now. The cowway took it for a ploy and didn't ease the pressure on Luke. If anything, it shoved harder, sensing victory. Then, miraculously, the pressure vanished from Luke's neck. Unable to think of turning to defend himself, of striking back, Luke shot to the surface. Air. Most delicious of gases, it filled his starved lungs, those weakened bellows pumping harder with every fresh breath. Coughing up water, he stayed on his knees, delirious with the pleasure of being able to breathe again. Only when his system's panicky requests for oxygen faded did he think to turn and look for his opponent. Blood trickled from the side of the cowway's head into the clear pond water. It was lying on its back, manifestly unconscious, maybe dead. On hands and knees, a thoroughly dazed and somewhat puzzled Luke crawled to the cowway's motionless side. With one hand he touched the other's face, raised a fist over it. But there was no movement. The cowway's distress was genuine and not some cat-and-mouse alien ploy. It did not rise to attack. Another body was suddenly in the water beside him. "You won, Luke, you beat him," the princess was shouting into his ear. She had both arms wrapped tightly around him and the pressure almost sent them both tumbling together into the water. "Don't you understand?" she asked brightly. "You won. We can all go free now. That is," she continued in a more subdued voice, staring around at the silent crowd and trying not to show any fear, "we can if these creatures have any sense of honor." "I wouldn't worry too much about that, Leia," he advised her, wiping water from his face. "Kanu has judged, remember. Besides, it takes many thousands of years of advanced technological development for a society to reduce honor to an abstract moral truism devoid of real meaning. If this were an imperial arena, then I'd be concerned." He regarded the watching natives. "I think the cowway keep their word." "We'll find out," she assured him, wishing she could share his certainty. Putting his left arm around her shoulders, she helped him to his feet. As they started out of the pond, Luke heard something burbling and snorting like a hog in heat. A glance to his left showed the twitching form of his opponent. He was gratified. The cowway wasn't dead. As soon as this became apparent, several cowway broke from the assembled ranks and approached their injured relative. For a moment Luke felt concern. He'd heard of primitive societies where the vanquished or dishonored representative of a tribe was put to death for his or her failure. It looked as if the cowway were more mature than that. They lifted their defeated champion to a sitting position and held some kind of burning plant under his face. Luke caught a whiff of it and it helped him regain his strength. He tried to hurry past. Even if the cowway was dead, he decided only half-jokingly, one breath of that incredibly pungent burning substance would have aroused him. Then something caught his eye and he paused, staring blankly at it. What had riveted his attention was not the cowway's continuing methods of medication, nor the vanquished warrior's convulsive reactions to them, but a large rock. As big as a man's head, it lay in the water close by the cowway's head. His fingertips retained the memory of that stone. It was the one he'd encountered prior to passing out. Or had he passed out? It seemed as if something deep inside him, some resource of which he was unaware, had reacted on the brink of asphyxiation to help him raise the rock, turn and fling it at his tormentor. Yet he couldn't recall even placing both hands around it, let alone lifting it clear of the water and throwing. "How did I do it?" he asked the princess. She eyed him uncertainly. Do what?" "Beat him," he added exhaustedly, gesturing loosely toward the cowway fighter. Her gaze traveling from the native back to Luke, the princess permitted herself a frown. "You mean you don't remember?" He shook his head. "I thought everything was finished when you were pushed under the second time, Luke. I suppose I was worrying needlessly, but by staying under so long you had us all fooled." "I wasn't fooling," Luke said to himself. The princess was smiling now. "Then you threw that big rock. Caught him right in the temple. The creature wasn't expecting it. He didn't even try to duck. I didn't think you were that supple an infighter, Luke." Luke could have objected, could have mentioned that he wasn't expecting it either. Only the obvious admiration shining from the princess's eyes kept him silent. They could discuss all that later, he argued with himself. But one thing seemed inarguable, somehow, he had thrown the rock. By one method or another, he'd thrown it. That was the important thing. Now to find out if his evaluation of the cowway would make his mysterious effort worthwhile. They reached Hala and the others. All were trying to congratulate him at once. Luke didn't reply. Retrieving his saber from the princess, he utilized it on low power to cut away the vines tying old Hala to the stalactites. The old woman nearly fell, momentarily incapacitated by lack of circulation to her bound legs. The princess was there to steady her. "Thank you, young lady." Hala bent over and rubbed her thighs. Luke moved to release the Yuzum and the droids. As he did so, one of the three chiefs, the one whose signal had initiated the fight, interposed itself between Luke and Key. For an awful moment Luke felt he'd completely misjudged the cowway, that he'd taken a romantic instead of realistic view of them. Was he going to have to fight again? Or possibly the Yuzum, not being human, would have to perform some difficult feat of their own to gain their freedom. What unimaginable facet of subterranean law did they face now? He needn't have troubled himself. The chief merely wished to illustrate Kanu's judgment in a fashion clear to all. Luke watched tensely as the native slipped a sharp-bladed knife of volcanic glass from his garments, relaxed when the blade was used to slice away first the Yuzum's restraints and then the droids. His relief faded when he heard a muttering sound and turned to see several cowway leading toward him, the one he had fought. One supported the bandaged native at each arm. The champion shook off the pair of helpers as he neared Luke. Muscles tight, Luke gripped the lightsaber firmly and waited. Key chittered ominously, but Luke put up a hand to quiet the Yuzum. Reaching with both arms, the cowway warrior clasped Luke around the shoulders and pulled. Luke thought he'd have to use the saber after all, when the native pushed him away gently. Then it slapped him on one cheek. Luke blinked. The blow had been nearly powerful enough to knock him out. The cowway murmured something, but somehow it didn't sound like a challenge. "Don't just stand there," an amused Hala instructed him, "hit him back." "What?" Luke was confused and not ashamed to show it. "I thought the fight was over." "It is," she explained. "It's his way of acknowledging that you're the stronger. Go on, hit him back." "Well, Using his right hand, he belted the quiescent cowboy hard enough to rattle the native's teeth. Despite Hala's assurances, he braced himself for some sort of violent response. Instead, the native displayed a satisfied expression and dropped to his knees before Luke as the crowd howled its approval. After the warrior had moved to one side, a second chief drew close. It spoke solemnly, directing its words toward Luke. "As near as I can figure him," Hala translated softly, "we're invited to stay for a feast tonight." "How can they tell tonight from today?" the princess wanted to know. "Probably they post watchers at their exits on the surface," the old woman surmised. "If they haven't always been underground dwellers, it's likely they'd retain surface methods of telling time." "Can't you refuse for us?" Luke asked hopefully. "Tell them how badly we have to return to the world above." Hala muttered something at the chief, who replied readily. "This isn't exactly a request, Luke. If we were to turn down the invitation, we'd apparently insult not only their hospitality but Kanu's as well. We have our choice, of course. If we insist on refusing, all we have to do is pick a champion to fight one of theirs and then," Luke interrupted with, "It's just occurred to me how hungry I am."